You are listening to Productivity Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after productivity coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives entrepreneurs the straight talk on personal productivity. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the Productivity Specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Productivity Straight Talk. Today is episode 195, Difficult Conversations, Strategies for Navigating Everyone's Kryptonite with Lara Currie. If you're a business owner who wants to improve your time management and elevate your productivity so you can maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time for what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. I'm looking forward to bringing my conversation to you with Lara Currie because I know, without a doubt, that when we suspect that we're going to have a difficult conversation or there is a difficult conversation to be had, we often start avoiding it. And when we avoid it, it doesn't go away, right? It can weigh us down. It can drain our energy. It's taking mental bandwidth. And I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, how does this relate to productivity? Well, if you're not equipped with strategies to have those difficult conversations and your go-to is to avoid them or lean into them with more dramatics than are needed, it is absolutely sabotaging your productivity because you're not able to show up in your best activities. You're not able to show up your best when you're preoccupied with this inevitable, difficult conversation. Maybe it's with a contractor. Maybe it's with a client or a strategic partner. Perhaps it's a vendor, or maybe even in a personal relationship. No matter where the conversation needs to be had, it can sabotage your productivity. So I wanted to bring Lara on to talk about ways in which we can feel more confident and equipped in having these difficult conversations so that we can move through them, get to the other side, and back to work. Lara Currie is passionate about uncovering dysfunctional communication patterns, combating manipulative tactics while empowering business owners in high-stress fields to communicate confidently. She is a podcaster, speaker, and trainer, and the author of Difficult Happens: How Triggers, Boundaries, and Emotions Impact You Every Day. With 29 plus years of experience in high conflict positions, she has a unique and intuitive understanding of why people act and react the way they do. Before we jump in and you hear my conversation with Lara, I want to make sure that you get your hands on my free on-demand mini training. That's right. I would love for you to take advantage of this free training so that I can teach you how to reclaim 30 minutes back each and every day. I'm going to debunk some very common myths that you have around time management and then teach you 3 specific strategies that you can utilize today, right now, the moment you watch the mini training on how to reclaim 30 minutes back each and every day. You can grab that by going to amberdelagarza.com/takebackyourtime. The link will be in the show notes as well as in the notes on any podcast player you are listening to me on today. So make sure you tap the notes, click the link, and grab your mini training. And now let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome to Productivity Straight Talk, Lara. How are you today?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, which is about difficult conversations and conflict, which I don't think people really look forward to those things, but I'm looking forward to talking about them with you because I have, in my experience, found that this comes up a lot in the workplace and with business owners. And there's so many different opportunities to have difficult conversations with our team members or even our clients. We sometimes have to have difficult conversations. So I invited you on because I wanted to pull back the curtain and have you share with us some strategies and tips to make that unfortunate but needed conversation a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I'm excited. I love difficult conversations.
Right? I mean, it is your wheelhouse. Before we jump into that, can you share with our audience in your own words a little bit about yourself today?
Yeah, so I actually have spent my entire career, spanning over 27 years, in high conflict jobs, basically in the court system, as an investigative journalist, as a private investigator, working in the nonprofit field. All of the clientele, and frankly, all my coworkers, were in a heightened emotional state because the stakes were so high. You know, when I was in the court system, it was whether or not they were going to lose their kids. You know, what was going to happen? That's people, when people come to you in those situations, they're not like, well, hey, how's it going? Great to meet you. You know, they're like, oh my God, what's happening? What's going on? It's this heightened emotional state that leads to misunderstanding, being triggered by something that you say or do or some action. And I started to notice patterns of the way that people acted and reacted when they were in this heightened emotional state. And with just a couple of key skills, being able to calm them down and get them into a place of hearing and understanding. And now it sounds a lot simpler than that explanation, but over the years, in each one of the different fields, it didn't really matter what the conflict was. The conflict always looked the same. There were always expectations and judgments and inferences that were going on behind the scenes. And sometimes people would be saying the exact same thing and not hearing each other, still arguing. So I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my career helping small business owners in particular who are in these fields, family law, real estate, frankly, I think every small business.
In my experience, absolutely. Anytime you have to work with people, whether clients or your team members, there's bound to be a bit of conflict.
Yeah, and it can derail your entire company. One dysfunctional employee can create a toxic work environment. One hostile client can alienate other clients, right? It can make you doubt what you're doing. It can also make you fire your client or for them to fire you. There's just so many nuances that can happen when you just don't deal with it difficult, because within difficult is your greatest opportunity for understanding and for growth.
Right. Okay. So I would imagine that there's some patterns that you see in small business owners. What are some typical things that are common miscommunications or things that could be perceived as conflict that happen in a small business?
I would say expectations and judgment. You know, there is so much that we can do ahead of time by just preframing our expectations. We know what we know. We know what we do in our business. We know what's going to happen. We know how we onboard and how we offboard, what they're going to learn. You know, we've got them. We know our business. We know we're going to take care of them. But when people come to you, you know, they don't know what they don't know. So if you can just pre-frame some of that information for them and just say, all right, here's what it's going to look like. Now, just imagine if you get, let's say, an avoidant type client and you are asking for information. You know that you need certain information by the first quarter, by the second quarter, et cetera. But if you are not clear with your expectations with this avoidant client, then you're going to start to wonder, well, what's going on? Have I done something wrong? Because right away we get defensive. And defensive behavior begets defensive behavior. If I come at you all defensive, you're going to get defensive. That's
right.
Just the way it is. So the more you know about yourself and the way you act in conflict, and in particular, what your conflict personality type is, the more you understand your clients and your team's conflict personality type. And just that knowledge alone can help you navigate any difficult interaction.
Okay, let's dive into the different types of, what did you call it? Conflict types?
Yeah, conflict personality types.
Conflict personality types. I would love to hear more about that. And how do we determine what we are? And how do we determine the person we could be having a conflict with? How do we find out what theirs is? I would be interested to know.
Well, I always know what my kryptonite is. So in regular life, I'm a perfectionist. I kind of, the way that I run my business, my life, my home, it tends towards the perfectionism type traits, you know, and we can all, frankly, whatever perfectionism is for you, and if you identify with that, well, then you're a perfectionist. But when you're in conflict, that means once you get into that heightened emotional state, most perfectionists don't remain perfectionists. They go to their conflict type. So my conflict type, which means whenever I feel stressed out and like someone's coming at me, I go into my pleaser mode. What can I do in this situation? How am I going to solve this? What are all of the issues? How can I make everybody happy? And so that is my conflict personality type. That doesn't mean I walk around day-to-day life being a pleaser. Your conflict type specifically comes up when you're in a heightened emotional state. So let me first tell you a little bit about the different types. There are 4 different types. And that is the pleaser, like I mentioned, the perfectionist, the victim, and the avoider. Now, right away, when I say those, I know y'all are going straight into your mind and thinking about, oh, I know this victim, or, oh God, avoiders. I've dealt with them. I've had several clients who have come to me because they've had their own clientele or even staff member ghost. I can tell you that is a trait of an avoider. And usually when they are activated, meaning they're acting like this, it's because they are in a heightened emotional state. So for the pleaser, their kryptonite, as it were, is the victim. Because can you just imagine a conversation with someone who's trying to make everything right and someone who blames everybody else? Okay, well, maybe it's my fault. Well, maybe I could do this. Or that's a cycle. They just get stuck in a dance of circular logic and it doesn't go anywhere. Oftentimes, if you are a perfectionist, when you are activated, then you are going to struggle the most with an avoider. Now, a victim will irritate you, but an avoider confounds you because you're like, no, I just need this information by this date. What is the issue? Why can't I make you do it?
I think you just found mine. Now that you described that, okay, we got it. I got it. Yes.
Yeah. I would say that most business owners are of every stripe, but perfectionists and pleasers are pretty high up there in the business owner stratosphere. Most business owners will identify with one or the other. Another one that comes out, and you might not recognize it, is the victim. But the victim comes out as anger. So we all have an active and passive manifestation of each one of these. Not to get too into the weeds, but as a pleaser, I also become a fixer. Well, that is my activated. So passive is me just, pleasing. Activated is when I'm trying to fix you. That's when I overstep my boundaries. That's when I am playing on the wrong side of the net and I am robbing someone of natural consequences or trying to fix something that doesn't belong to me. That's when you can really get into trouble. Perfectionist can turn into a controller, trying to control the environment, control the situation, control the other person. Nope, that's a boundary overstep. Victim becomes a blamer. An avoider becomes an innocent. I don't know what you're talking about. I never got that email. I just don't know,
Yeah.
That is the way that they overstep.
Okay. So I'm hearing that there's like a healthy and a kind of an unhealthy side of each of these types. And if we can stay within our boundaries, how do we deal with someone that is activated? Like, how do we deactivate them? I don't even know if that's the word, but if someone is avoiding, so we'll take me. I think I'm self-diagnosed, I'll say, just based on what you said, as the perfectionist. And I would be known to shoot off a detailed email. I just need this, bullet it out by this date. Like making it super clear, trying to control it, make it as simple as possible. But someone that goes shoe. So how do you deactivate them? How do you bring that down and actually come to resolution?
Well, it's so nuanced. It depends on the entire situation. So when I work with a client, usually we start with their business model and setting up their business to preframe, to set up, these are my expectations. These are the deadlines. These are the dates. This is what I can do for you. But also you need to understand how those people communicate. So there's that, I don't want to go too into the weeds with all that NLP stuff. Are they verbal? Are they auditory? Do they like to read instructions? Do they want to see a video from you explaining your onboarding and offboarding method? Do they want a detailed checklist? Do they just want to talk to you and that they'll understand it? So you need to know, first of all, how the client hears you, how they best take in a message. So I know that when I get an email that is more than just a two fingers thick, I'm going to get to that later. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the to-do file. So, and for an avoider, I would assume, now that's me making an assumption, that that's going to feel like a lot of homework that's even going to put more pressure on them. So you kind of have to get there before they ghost on you. The second thing I say is you cannot control anybody but yourself. So reflection is always is always a critical step. What were your assumptions? What were your judgments? What were your expectations? And what is the outcome? Which is basically the conflict cycle. That's the loop that goes over and over and over again. When they ghost on you, you can use those three ways to communicate with them, verbally, visually, and what is the other one? Auditorily, kinesthetically. Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. And you've done what you can do. You can only control yourself. You can't make somebody do anything else, but there's a lot you can do ahead of time, because an avoider is going to give you lots of clues that they're feeling overwhelmed, that they're feeling pressured before they actually ghost.
All right, then let's dive into some of the preventative ways. In a small business, you referenced already like checklists and how does somebody learn and consume information better. Now, I didn't know that it was this reason why I do it, okay? But I've always said that there's some people that are going to hear everything you say on a discovery call, for example, and then others that need to read it, and others that want to experience it, like going through your contract and kind of picking it apart. And so I've always recommended for myself and for my clients to have like a duplication process. So whatever you said on the call, then follow it up with an email. And I just found it got results, but I didn't realize that it was part of this whole pre-framing and meeting people where they're at, I guess, based on how they consume information particularly.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, what is the best way that you learn? I know for me, I'm addicted to YouTube. I learned everything on how to set up my podcasting studio on YouTube. If I'm going to cook a meal, going straight to YouTube. I'm a visual and kinesthetic learner, meaning that I need to do it and watch it. That's how I learn. And I know a lot of people are not. They like to read. My mom has more books than the public library because she likes to read about it.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my process. I think we've hit on those. So when a client calls, I tell them what they need to know. And then I follow it up with an email. And then the email, I actually do a Loom video walking them through the contract. And it was interesting. I've had this video for some time, and I happened to have to clean up my Loom account because I was over the Loom video allowed amount. And I realized how few people watch the video because it says how many times the video's been watched. So I'm sure there's some people that just leaned into it. They're like, yeah, she's going to walk me through it. And other people are like, just give me the contract. Let me read it through myself at my own speed. So meeting people where they're at and giving them options. And for me, the reason I even did that was because way long time ago, prior to being completely virtual, I would walk through the contract and get a head nod on all the big points to pre-frame any issues that I knew would come up with working with a client. And when I went virtual, I was like, well, how do I make sure they're reading it and not just signing off? Because now we're going to have issues down the road. Yeah.
Well, you're one of those savvy business owners. What's amazing to me is there's all different types of business owners too. There's people who love people and who also are passionate about what they do. I work with a lot of women in tech, and they are a unique personality. They're much more introverted and matter of fact. And they really often will miss cues, visual or verbal cues that someone may or may not be triggered, may or may not be starting to slide into that heightened emotional state or not understand, which is, that's a gross generalization, but, we use those as an example, to move forward. So a lot of the business owners that I do work with, they don't get that. They don't understand. Like, well, just read it. It's there. I gave you a copy. What's the problem?
Right. But
so
for most people, many people will gloss over a long contract. And I know that, except for that contract was written, in my experience, based on anything that could have gone wrong in a relationship. And so now you have these clauses and different disclosures and things. What is your recommendation for properly pre-framing an agreement between a client and yourself?
Well, I would say, first of all, know your expectations. What do you expect of them? And also, it depends on the type of business. So if you're a family law attorney, just know that you're going to have moments when your client is triggered. There's no way that you can walk through the job that you need to do without some difficulty coming up. Well, what are those difficulties? The understanding that fair and law are two entirely different things. What does that mean? How are you going to help your client, even though some things may not be fair, but legally you will do the best for them? And what does that look like? What does that mean? So that's something that you may want to pre-frame, because most family law clients or people who go to a family law attorney, they've never dealt with the law before. They assume that justice means fair.
Right.
When it doesn't. It's an amalgam of laws that we've all agreed on, which are completely reactionary. Just like you mentioned, all of those clauses are because there was a lawsuit somewhere where someone needed to define further the meaning of a phrase or the meaning of that sentence, right?
Yes.
And so that's something that you'll need to pre-frame. Put yourself in your client's shoes. So another example is I work with a lot of nonprofits. And so a lot of the people that they are dealing with they have some issues around dysfunctional communication. So right away, when you are communicating with a lot of these, how can I frame this? They deal with a lot of rude and toxic people. People who come at you, talking to you really, really rudely. And I know sometimes people will be like, I know you ain't talking to me, or they just come right back at them. And that sets up a dysfunctional communication pattern. Like, okay, you're going to talk to me like this, and I'm going to talk to you like this. A simple pre-framing for them is an action, not something that they're going to do or say. So what they do is they have amnesia. When the person talks disrespectfully to them, they talk to them in the kindest possible way. They speak to them as if the other person is being super kind to them. And what happens is over the course of that first conversation, that person starts to mimic them. That person will start to talk in the way that they talk. Now, that's just because, I used to work in nonprofit. I've worked with enough small businesses, small business leaders who are in nonprofit that deal with dysfunctional personality types, that's a simple pre-frame of action that they can do. Whereas the family law attorney, that's a simple pre-frame of the content that they're going to be dealing with that they can do. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Which is inviting me to ask, what are there different types of pre-frame? Because I was not aware.
Yeah, just like I sometimes I wonder if I have a little bit of autism in some way, because I'm like, yes, everything's in 3s and 4s. It goes like this. It's active and passive. But I do think that there's 4 types of pre-frame. And one of the pre-frames, I think that is in the way that you're going to communicate with them and the way that you're going to appreciate them. This one I use a lot with staff members. So have you ever heard of the love languages?
I have completely. I just spoke about it in another podcast. It changed my whole world.
Oh, yeah. I 100% agree. Well, we also have appreciation languages. And the same author talks about them. So my love language is acts of service, right? Mm-hmm. But when I'm at work, my love language is quality time. I want to spend time with you. I want to dive into a concept. I want to be on the podcast and talk about geeky things about communication that I just love. That's the way I feel appreciated. Well, when you know your staff's appreciation language, then set that up, pre-frame that to, like if yours are words of encouragement, just say, man, that was such a great episode. I just listened to those micro habits that you had at the first of the year. Love that episode. Whatever it is, that's a simple way you can pre-frame, which is pre-setting verbal expectations. The second way is to put yourself in your client's shoes, like the family law attorney example that I gave. A lot of my real estate, brokerage house clients, we do this because they know what they know. They also know that they have to deal with a lot of different companies and people just to get your house purchased. But the people who are buying a house, they don't know that,
Right.
So there's a lot of pre-framing, like, okay, here's what it's going to look like. These are the different players. Here are the things I have control over, and here are the things I don't have control over. Also, don't text me at 10 o'clock on Saturday.
Isn't that the truth? It's all about setting those boundaries and pre-framing. You're going to be so excited about this house you found, not at 10 o'clock at night for me. Like you have to, and okay, so real estate is my background too. And I realized that In fact, my clients do this too. So my clients are like, oh, there shouldn't be an issue with the transaction. I mean, my clients are realtors, right? And they get frustrated that something went south. And I literally flip it on its head and I say, actually, that's when you show up your best. And it's a small percentage that a transaction goes completely smooth. So if we know that, then the pre-frame, why the client's super excited at the first meeting, as you say, this transaction, I will get you to the finish line. And there will be some hiccups. And that is when I am servicing you. That's when I'm representing you. And just know that it's going to happen and you're in the right hands. Like, that's great pre-framing, because now you get to then revert back when it's high stress, right? They're thinking they're going to lose their house and there's time frames. And you can say, I told you this was going to happen, and just know that I'm taking care of you. I would assume that is pre-framing and bringing that emotion back down at a time that you're referring back to a time where they were so excited to work with you and everything was rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then think about all the people that you deal with, if you're in real estate in particular, who you're selling their house. I did this talk for the Washington State Realtors Association, and one of the topics was dead animals and creepy dolls don't sell houses. And how do you have those conversations? I mean, that 5-point buck, brilliant, beautiful. I'd love to hear the story. Get it off the wall. We're in Seattle. That's not going to sell the house.
Yeah.
Those are also difficult conversations that you need to know how to navigate and to pre-frame. What sells homes? How can we list your home to get you the best deal? You don't want to offend people, but you also want to let them know why. Why their 5-point buck or that really creepy doll collection that your grandma gave you, although you love it and it's, one of your prized possessions, it shouldn't be on display while you're showing your house. So that's another way that you can pre-frame, is just experiences that you've had where you've run into trouble before. And that's when you should really know your kryptonite. To round up all the different types of pre-framing, the last one is that you can also say, so I know that things are going to come up. How will I know that you need a little more explanation from me? How will I know that you are feeling overwhelmed? Whatever a typical client may start to feel from you or go off the rails. When do you know that your client might start to go, okay, and possibly an avoider might ghost, or a victim might start to blame, or a perfectionist might try to control the situation, or a pleaser might try to fix whatever they perceive the issue to be? You can just say, hey, can I get to know you a little bit better? I want to take care of you the best way that I possibly can. How will I know? What are your cues? And it gets them thinking.
Yeah. And I love that strategy. And I would say that perhaps you could also ask how they best like to be communicated with. So again, to bring it full circle, do they want the information typed out? Do they want to be called? Do they, and hopefully that the people we're working with know that about themselves. But I also found that if they don't know that, you find out quick, because I can send an email and then get ghosted and then text and I get a response in a second. Right. And so now those, if you're listening, are the cues of how do you actually reach and communicate to your client based on how they're naturally reacting to you. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the craziest things over the holidays when we were all locked down, and I feel like it just goes on forever and ever. Anyway, we've got Skype and we've got Zoom and we've got StreamYard and we've got yada, 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 yada. Well, I want to talk with my kids all at once. And they're like, awesome, meet me on Discord. Like, seriously, another platform? But they didn't want to do Zoom because they're all on Discord. They all play video games together, watch movies together, play D&D, all that kind of stuff on Discord. So I had to learn yet another platform, download it, show it to my mom, show it to my sister, so we could all get together over the holidays. Sometimes you may do that because, of course, it's my kid, so I'm going to do that. Other times you may need to set up your structures and say, you know what, I'm sorry, but we're going to be using Skype, or, I do all of my podcast interviews over Zoom, or you need to be really clear about your expectations and your boundaries, because that might open up, oh, I don't have Zoom. I have no idea how to do that. Can you help me with that? That's another way you can set yourself up for success and do some pre-framing.
Excellent. And, we don't know all the things that need pre-framing until something goes wrong. So I guess my best advice here is to take note of that and then create a solution. So you're going to put the fire out, whatever it creates in your business, which is going to be a time suck, energy suck. And that's why we're talking about conflict on Productivity Straight Talk. But then I want you to go to solution. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? So I can think about, like, I'm literally thinking of my coaching agreement right now, and I can go down it and I can say, talking about cancellations and how I handle them, that came up because somebody started canceling left and right. And I thought, why would they cancel? They're paying me. Years and years ago, that got put right there on how many cancellations, what kind of time frame they need to give me notice for. Now, if I didn't have it in the contract and hadn't reviewed it with them, you want to talk about an uncomfortable conversation when you got a client that cancels a coaching session last minute and you're like, what do I do with my time? Or, okay, it's just one time. But usually an offender of one time becomes an offender of 2 or 3 times. So then those are the types of things that I've put in the contract. And then when I review the contract, I say things like this. I'll say, things are going to come up and you are free to cancel a session at any time, but you forfeit it if it's under 24 hours. And if you cancel because you double booked yourself. So my client...
And no one's going to disagree with that because it's like, oh yeah, you've said it out loud. That makes total sense.
Right. And it's on the onboard when they're so excited to work with you, right? They don't know what that means. Then fast forward 3 months and they've got a client, let's just take a realtor, comes into town. They want to show them houses. And of course, they're not going to turn down working with their client. And then they're like, oh, well, now I'm double booked. So I got to cancel an Amber. Okay, but you forfeit it. Like, you are free to go take your client and make money, but that's also my time that I have to respect and make money too. And then when it happens, it's not uncomfortable, or at least it isn't for me. I just said, you are free to take your client, but I'm not going to reschedule per our agreement. And that's the end of it, because they had heard it before.
I love hearing those boundaries in action. Because clear boundaries, you don't, when you have unclear boundaries and then you set that and you don't buy into it, then you take it with you. You go home, you feel bad. You don't feel good about the interaction. You worry about the next phone call. You worry about the next coaching call. It manifests itself physically in you when every emotion, your body keeps the score. But when you're clear about your boundaries and you stand behind them, then it is what it is. There's no hard feelings. And your client can feel that. Your client can feel whether or not you believe in that boundary.
Right. I have a question for you. So let's just say we were assuming earlier that our clients or employees or team member were activated, right, into like the dark side of these 4 tendencies. What happens when we check ourselves? So we realize we've overstepped or we're like going into the dark side. How do we pull ourselves back to the healthier side of these tendencies once we're kind of spiraling? We're in the middle. We're hearing the story. We're all fired up. We feel disrespected. We feel like our boundaries were stompled over. Those are all the stories we tell ourselves to get to that, emotionally heightened state. What are some tips to reel that back in and reset?
I love this question. One of my favorite skills that I teach people is a simple apology. Wow. You know what? I'm really sorry. I just realized I'm feeling a lot of things right now, and it has everything to do with me. This is all about me. But I've noticed that, and that's what you do. You just say it out loud. Because what happens is that gives them the opportunity to say, oh yeah, you know what? I'm kind of feeling defensive too. And let's just take this down a notch. When you say what's really going on out loud, when you apologize for your part in a thing, even if you really want them to say they were sorry for something, but you can't make other people do anything. You can only own your part. And when you own your own part, you model for other people. That this is a safe place. This is a safe place for us to have this conversation. I'm going to take responsibility for what I just did and what I just said. And, we can do the same thing. You mentioned earlier that almost everything that you have in your onboarding and your how you preframe is because of a situation. I think there's nothing stronger than an apology or a recognition of, hey, you know what? I feel like something went off the rails. You're no longer responding to my emails, and I'm wondering what I have done. If you can just let me know, or here's where my mind is going, and that it just opens up the dialogue.
Yeah. And it stops the assumptions. As you can imagine, I attract a lot of people who don't have time to return voicemails or text messages or check their email. But when I first started my business, I didn't put two and two together. So if I had someone not respond to me, and I'm talking almost 10 years ago, you should have heard the stories I had in my head. They don't want to work with me. I upset them. I pushed them too hard in coaching, like all of these things. And it was none of that, because once I built up my confidence with working with clients and started checking in, it was all about them. But what happened when I made it about me? Then when we did talk, it was awkward, and it was like this tension, and it was all in my head because of the assumptions I made about what their action or inaction meant. So I love that you said that a lot of conflict comes up from making assumptions. And so if we can limit that or check it and see if our assumptions are true at all, we can kind of cut that off, that conflict or possible conflict off before it gets there.
Yeah, and we can start to look at things critically. I know that when I first started coaching with a lot of people, I'm such a nerd. I get so excited. I'm like, we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And I was forgetting about the repair portion, which is so critical when it comes to any kind of personal development, professional development, any kind of growth. You need to sit back and repair. You need to take a look at it. You need to feed your soul a little bit before you can move on. And it took me a couple of clients before I was like, whoa, okay, here's how the coaching needs to go. I need to make sure to put a reflection, a repair, and here's where we are going forward. And I really think it's the same in every business. I'm sure that there's probably a section in the work that you do where someone like me who, if you'd see my office right now, I mean, I'm a little embarrassed. It's just like paper, wall to wall, stacks. I'm a visual learner. And so I can't have things in drawers. They have to be piled onto surfaces,
Right.
But working with someone like me, where it's like, you know what, I start to lose them right after this step. So I need to add a step of checking in. And no matter what your business is, there is a point where you can check in with your staff, with your team, with your boss, with your upline, your downline, and with your clientele to make sure that everything is running smoothly and to see if you might need to add another step in to avoid a conflict and see what their expectations are. Because they may have expectations. You're like, where'd you get that from?
Right.
That's all internal.
Yes. Okay, so we talked a lot of examples about conflict between you and your clients. I want to shift gears to some conflict with our team, because boy, do I see that a lot. I mean, that could have been almost our entire episode is all about the conflict that a small business owner has. And when you were referencing your background of being in these highly emotional industries, right? Small businesses are so unique in that our team members become so intimately close. It's not like a big corporation and you're like the manager and your people are out there. And I just feel like you get to know them. You get to know their family and who they're supporting and what their personal goals are. And it's such a close relationship. And then you got to pull that I'm the boss card, right? And so it could become emotionally charged just because of the history that has been created. Do you have any specific strategies on how to avoid miscommunication, even specifically around delegating or setting expectations? Because that's where I see a lot of the conflict is the boss has one expectation, doesn't fully communicate that to the employee misses the mark, and now there's all this tension.
Oh, absolutely. This is when I get really nerdy and I go into systems theory. Especially when it comes to the psychology of family systems, small businesses are very, very similar.
Yeah.
Especially, my clientele and probably a lot of the people that you work with, it's women-owned businesses or it's women leaders. And we do create a more familial environment. We truly care about our employees. We truly care about even some of our subcontractors that we've been with for years. They feel like part of the team, part of the family.
Yes.
And so you do set up that system dynamic where we have our different roles. And sometimes when a system starts to get a little unhealthy, you get put into that, well, I'm the mom role and I'm going to, I'm going to be domineering and you're going to be like, whatever, I didn't do it. Or, so the first thing I would say is to know the players' personalities, absolutely know the conflict personality type of each person, know what their appreciation language is, and then also know that like how your business runs and everything, I think that everything should be on a 3-month cycle. I think every 3 months, there's usually a push in a business. We're all on the quarter system. Make sure that you do that repair that I had talked about earlier. I always think of Kara from Pepper's Personal Assistants here in Seattle. She has an amazing personal assistant company, but her and her team, man, they are always doing some team bonding stuff. She makes sure that she has her quarterly retreats where she surprises them with something, whether it's a boat ride, whether it's fishing, whether it's a war game, what doesn't matter what it is. She makes sure to have that bonding time where they can have some real conversations. If expectations aren't being met, then go back to them. And also own your part. I believe that personal development is the muscle that does all the heavy lifting for professional development. So as a leader and as a business owner, you need to continue to work on yourself. Were you being clear about your expectations? Were you not? Were you putting friendships above? We talked before. I'm not sure if it was when you were on my podcast or in the right before the call about the micro boundary breach. Mm-hmm. When you're friends and you start to let things slide, right? As a business owner, you start answering that phone call at 10 p.m. on a Saturday. You start letting someone cancel and not really bringing it up. Those are the micro boundary breaches that lead to you feeling taken advantage of, you starting to doubt your own boundaries, starting to doubt your own worth, get to that stinking thinking, where we start to spiral. So you need to really watch out for that and just stand by and be sure to check in with them. Say, hey, you know what? I'm going to let this slide. Or, you know what? We've done it this way. I don't want to do it that way anymore. What works best from your point of view? Am I doing it right? What is my expectation of you? Is it too much? Checking in with them, making sure you do that repair. I feel like I might have gone off the wheelhouse there.
No, oh my gosh. I mean, hold on. I had so many ahas. So first of all, you said there's seasons of push in your business. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I actually talk about that quite a bit. And you gave me a big aha. Like we're in the season of a push right now. Literally, we all internally call it that way because one of my assistants is going on maternity leave at the end of the month. So we're calling it the big push. She's got a baby to put out. I have a bunch of content and podcasts and all the things to put out because she's my content manager. Mm-hmm. And also the rest of the team is like, we're just moving fast. And I almost keep telling them in meetings when I meet with them, like the promised land, just get us to middle of February. We're going to get to the middle of February. And I promise things will slow down. But now I feel like they need to slow down and I need to do something for them. Like I loved your example of like slowing it down and doing the bonding and the repair. Because we are in such a push, we jump on one-on-ones and the small talk is very minimal because I'm onto the agenda and down the list. And I don't want my business to run like that 24/7. That's not my intention. That just is how it is now. So thank you for that great aha for me. And what I'm going to implement absolutely with my team is identifying the slow times and being purposeful with those connections. Great tip. And then you also talked about micro boundary breaches. Mm-hmm. They don't feel micro. Like in the moment, like when they're happening, it feels like, well, they could feel little, but I guess I don't make them little. And here's why. Because I feel like, and this is a story I tell myself, is that I've robbed myself of the opportunity to hold that boundary later. So the example I give is that if my boundary is when my door's shut, that my son doesn't come walking in the office because I'm recording or I'm with a client. And if he comes in and I'm not recording or with a client, but my door was shut and I ignore it, I've now lost my opportunity to hold that boundary with him. And so the way that I do it is while I may be elated he came in because it was a good time, I will say, that when mom's door is shut, you can't come in, but you can stay this time. Like I'll acknowledge the boundary that was broken because I still want that. Like I want to make sure I'm not giving mixed messages. And I would assume, it's very much the same when you make an exception with a client on a cancellation or you make an exception for an employee that calls out sick an extra time because the context of it is to acknowledge it so you're not losing your opportunity to hold that boundary in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when it feels the worst, at least for me, is when I overstep my own boundaries. When I'm the one who says, you know what, I'm going to work out tomorrow. Or, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and schedule out whatever it is. It's when I overstep my boundaries that I start to feel the worst in my business. When it comes to other people, those little slides, sometimes I only notice them in hindsight. And that's why I love looking at the quarter calendar, because a little bit of reflection goes a long way. We can't move forward until we look back.
Right. And so you just totally tied that in at the end as boundaries with ourselves and how that makes us feel. And if we don't feel great about ourselves, we're not showing up great as leaders. And maybe we show up differently on how we interact with our clients if we are not holding our own boundaries to stay healthy mentally and just really showing up our best.
Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, we are going to make mistakes in every single thing that I talked about today. We're humans. It's going to happen. It's what we do after we make the mistake that makes the difference.
Yes. All right. So as we close out, my invitation is for each of you to look for patterns in conflict with your team members or with your clients and search for what the solution, what is the preframe? How can you set up a system or a process so that you're not stepping into that fire over and over again and letting it rob your time and energy?
Yeah, definitely. I love that.
Awesome. All right, Laura. So if our listeners would like to hear more about you, where do they find you? And I believe you have something special for them today.
Yes. I'm everywhere at Difficult Happens. So just go to difficulthappens.com. And I have a whole series on there on the podcast about how to deal with passive aggressive behavior, avoiders, all the things that we talked about today. And if you want 10 tips on how to deal with difficult people, just go to difficulthappens.com/10 tips and get your free ebook on how to deal with difficult personalities today.
Yes. And the work you do is exactly what you summed up, is the personal development feeds the professional development. And if you think the way that you can show up better for your clients or with your team can happen through developing the skill set of having difficult conversations and managing yourself in those situations, I definitely go check Lara out and her podcast.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. It was great to see your face again, too.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Lara and that you are able to take some valuable, actionable takeaways from today's episode. So often, difficult conversations can get turned into something that's so much bigger than it needs to be. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring Lara on with some strategies for us. Almost as if I have a crystal ball and I could foretell what your future is, I guarantee you will need to have difficult conversations. As a business owner, as a leader, it is your job to have difficult conversations. And so why not get better at the skill set of really feeling confident and effective with your communication in those times where it could be high stress or big energy or really emotional? How can you show up your best and communicate with confidence and clarity to get the results you're looking for? That's what I want for you today. With today's episode, what will you take action on? No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. I want you to be able to put this into practice. The very next time you find yourself saying, I don't want to have that conversation. Oh, do I really have to have this conversation? I don't want you to get into the dramatics of it. I want you to equip yourself with the skill set to clearly communicate what it is you need to communicate and get through it, get on the other side of it so that you are not sabotaging your business, your success, or your goals. And as a reminder, you can grab my free on-demand mini training, Take Back Your Time, in the notes of this podcast episode. So tap on the notes, click the link, and grab your mini training. So that's my straight talk for you today. Until next time, have a productive week.